and welcome to The Buzz. So, Sarah, Winifred, and Mary Sanderson. You might recognize those names as the Witch Sisters from the classic 1993 movie Hocus Pocus, but they were actually real people that the movie was loosely based upon. This week, let's take a look at the Sanderson sisters and the Salem Witch Trials. Winifred, Sarah, and Mary are based on three real-life sisters in Salem who were accused of witchcraft during the trials: Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Cloyce, and Mary Easty. Cloyce features particularly prominently in the chronicles of the Salem Witch Trials. She was among the group of women first accused of witchcraft by the young Abigail Williams, her young sister and her cousin, in 1692. The accusations that essentially set off the colony's panic around witches. While Hocus Pocus loosely bases the story on the three sisters, Disney takes plenty of creative license to, Disney up the story a good bit for entertainment. The lives and fate of the real Sanderson sisters and many other women of Salem Village were not nearly as fun and would not make for great family entertainment. I guess that's why there are not more comedies made about the Salem Witch Trials, but the historic event should be researched because there are many lessons that should be learned from that dark part of history. One of the scariest things about living in Salem in the late 1600s was not being subjected to the evil curses of witches, but it was the judicial system and just being born female in general. The infamous witch hunt began with a group of girls behaving strangely. In January of 1692, 11-year-old Abigail Williams started uncontrollably screaming. She was the niece of a prominent minister named Putnam who had strong political aspirations and an ugly feud with another prominent politician and pastor in town named Proctor. The young girls were acting out and refusing to do chores. After being warned several times and caught lying about it, Abigail fell into what was called a spectral fit. She began screaming, kicking, and throwing things, and threw herself on the floor in a tantrum. Her uncle, alarmed and likely embarrassed by the display of the spoiled child in his charge, ordered her to her room for rest and care, and she escaped any further chore duty. Her cousin and daughter of the minister, Anne Putnam, must have realized this loophole to chores because she also fell into spectral fits 2 days later after having to pick up the chore duties of the first girl. After a doctor examined the girls and could not find any medical reason for the behavior, he blamed bewitching. Someone surely was to blame for the horrid behavior of these young girls in the minister's care, and it certainly could not be him, so they questioned the girls until they had the name of the witch who was to blame for their behavior. The girls blamed a woman named Tituba, who was their caretaker and who had originally ordered them to do the chores. Rather than professing her innocence, Tituba confessed to save her life, and for good measure she alleged that there were other witches in their midst. The people who least conformed to the norms of Salem's Puritan society suffered the most accusations. Outspoken women, slaves, Quakers, people with criminal histories, the fact that someone simply didn't like you or that you had resting witch face could get you accused. Of course, the people who dared object to the witch trials also found themselves on the receiving end of the witchcraft accusations. The girls basically found themselves on a pedestal in front of the whole town and were held as heroes for saving the village from the evil of these witches. As the months stretched on, the marginalized people who'd initially been accused were joined by respected citizens, children, former ministers, among others. Interestingly, the bewitched and possessed were the only people in town who were in no danger of becoming accused themselves. So, while some of the girls might have been enjoying their time in the spotlight, others might have been smart enough to know joining the ranks of those who were victims of witchcraft was the only guarantee of safety. It's no wonder that so many of the women and girls started showing signs of being cursed. During the Salem Witch Trials, nearly 200 people were accused of practicing witchcraft. So why weren't more of them executed? Because confession meant you would avoid paying the ultimate price of death and could avoid the witch tests. And so there were a heck of a lot of confessions, which just made it easier to accuse anyone you wanted. Some, fearing for their lives, confessed to ridiculous crimes like dancing with the devil and riding on broomsticks, which says nothing about how guilty they were and everything about how scared they were. So, why didn't anyone stand up and call shenanigans on this whole thing? Once the madness of the Salem Witch Trials was fully underway, it was a really, really bad idea to stand up and say, "Hey, maybe you guys are actually wrong about all this witchcraft stuff, you think?" It's sad that so many people kept their mouths shut while their friends and neighbors were accused, put on trial, and tortured. But it's really not super surprising that they did, because each time someone did speak up, you guessed it, they were accused of being a witch too. I mean, who else would come to the aid of a witch? Another witch, right? So speaking up would get you accused, and most people simply chose to point a finger instead and yell, "Yep, I saw her flying on her broomstick last night too." Another common accusation and proof that someone was a witch was that the cursed person would have a dream about the witch doing crazy, witchy things. Upon recounting the dream, the witch was arrested with this proof. The hysteria spread, and the accusations started spreading towards those good, upstanding families in the village too. You know what they say about not speaking up when they come from your neighbor? There will not be anyone to speak up when they come for you. It holds true here as well. More and more women and girls started having spectral fits in public to a highly dramatic degree. They blamed it on being bewitched by someone specific in the community, usually someone on the other side of their divided political camp. It was a 2-for-1 advantage because the women who escaped witchcraft accusations were the ones who were victims of the bewitching. So how is that motivation to spread the narrative? The more powerful families in Salem were embroiled in land disputes and just generally did not like each other. Once the trials got rolling, it started to become clear a woman could be accused not just for her own political beliefs, but for her husband's political beliefs. Rebecca Nurse was famously accused not long after her husband joined a committee that spoke out against the current town minister, the very minister whose daughter and niece started the whole ordeal. John Proctor's pregnant wife Elizabeth was one of many people accused of witchcraft, but it became clear as her testimony progressed that the person who was really on trial was Proctor himself. He was one of the few townspeople who dared say out loud that the accusers were lying and that he thought the trials were an injustice. Meanwhile, most of the rest of the men were all, "She's a witch! Hang her!" So his opinion was not especially appreciated among his peers. Proctor was eventually accused himself and was one of the few men in Salem to be hanged for witchcraft. In modern America, we have the freedom to speak out against injustice. We might sign a petition, or participate in a march, or attend a town hall, or complain that it's just not easy enough to vote. That is, if there isn't something really good on television that night. But during the Salem Witch Trials, well, it was generally a bad idea to speak up against injustice because the person on the other end of the injustice might just end up being you. The danger of speaking out was probably one of the reasons why the trial went on as long as they did. When no one will say anything in the face of injustice, it makes it really easy for the injustice to continue. So what would you have done in those days? Would you have stood up for those accused, or would you have been all, "Yeah, we need to rid the village of these witches right now"? Much like America today, the political world of Salem, Massachusetts was a deeply divided place. Nowadays, when we disagree with each other about politics, we just put bumper stickers on our cars and trash talk each other on Twitter. But in Salem, Massachusetts in the 1690s, people had to trash talk each other face to face. And in those days, you could use Puritan law to put your enemy in his place. During the Salem Witch Trials, it became easier than ever. Life was hard in Salem in the late 1600s. There were the bitterly cold winters, the failing crops, and the political strife. So you could freeze your butt off all night, struggle to put food on the table in the morning, deal with a scheming enemy in the afternoon, and get accused of witchcraft in the evening. Yes, it wasn't much fun to be a citizen of Salem, but it was especially sucky if you were a female citizen. In Salem, Massachusetts, women were second-class citizens. As a woman, you weren't permitted to vote in the general court, you couldn't buy or sell land, you couldn't sue someone, you couldn't file for divorce, and you had to do everything your husband told you to. So once you were up there on the stand, well, you already didn't have a lot of respect from all of the men who'd imposed those stupid restrictions on your freedom, so there wasn't a whole lot of hope for unconvincing them of the thing they were already convinced of. But no worries, there was evidence in the witch tests to help prove your innocence. The evidence was, of course, testimony by those who accused you. There were reports seeing a woman turn into a cat, ride a broom across the sky, dance with the devil, or even witness her hair color change. The witch tests were a series of tests designed to prove that the accused were indeed witches. Some of those tests included the unwitching test, where witches were blindfolded and their hands were laid upon the cursed persons who were having dramatic fits. If the cursed person stopped having the witch fits, then it was seen as proof that the accused witch was guilty. When this happened, the witches were taken to an observation prison for the next test, the witch mark inspection. During the witch mark inspection, women were ordered to strip down to allow a group of men to inspect their bodies for moles or birthmarks that indicated that they were indeed witchy women. If they refused, it was an admission of guilt. If they allowed it, they were also proven to be witches because of their lack of modesty and morals. The water test was another way to disprove or prove that a woman was indeed in league with the devil. They tied a brick around her ankle and ordered her to walk into the water until it covered her head. If she sank, then she was innocent, but still drowned. But if she escaped the water test, it was proof that she was a witch with friends in dark places. How is that for a lose-lose situation? Of course, you could skip the test and trial altogether and save your life by confessing that you are indeed a witch. Those who confessed were spared the trial, but any property that was owned by them or the family immediately became the property of the village. How is that for another motive to accuse? Like Sarah Winifred and Mary Sanderson of Hocus Pocus fame, if the accused people failed one of these impossible tasks or refused to attempt them at all, the witches were then hanged outside their house or in the town square. The final execution was on September 22, 1692. Contrary to what most people believe, witches were not burned at the stake during the witch trials of Salem. They either died during the witch test, or if they survived the witch test and were found guilty, they died by hanging. 20 people had died by hanging. 5 more died in prison. Approximately 200 people, which accounted for 30% of the population, were accused in Salem in a few short months and were found to be witches. Although the Sanderson sisters never got their justice, the rest of the Salem witches eventually had their names cleared, and their trials have become a more memorable part of American history. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, publicly acknowledged his own error and guilt in the proceedings. In 1702, the General Court declared that the trials had been unlawful. In 1706, Ann Putnam, one of the girls who started the whole mess, apologized for her role as an accuser and admitted that it was an elaborate scheme. January of 1967, the Massachusetts court declared that the Salem witch trials were unlawful. Afterwards, the Massachusetts colony restored the names of the people tried.